All right, welcome. It is Wednesday, April 27th, 2022. This year is moving very fast. I am on location at the beach. You can pick the beach you like, and that's where I am. It's a nice day in Austin, Texas. It's actually 81 degrees, mostly cloudy. Today is Innotech. If you want to see all the CEOs, CIOs, and CTOs in Austin, you go to the convention center to hang out with them. Tomorrow is at the beginning of a two-day conference called the Intelligent Infrastructure at the Fairmont Hotel, all about the future of intelligent infrastructure. I'll be moderating a panel on Friday on energy resiliency. Look forward to seeing a lot of old friends, and if you're going to be around, stop by the Fairmont Hotel, a beautiful property, fairly new in Austin. We have a great guest today, and before we get rolling, I'm going to ask Dr. John Sibley Butler for some music.
I could hear the wind blowing in my mind, just the way it used to do, through the Georgia pines. And you were there to answer when I called. You and me, we had it all.
All right. Thank you, John.
No problem. How are you doing today?
Thank you, John. How are you today?
I'm just doing fine, looking at lots of problems. I've been spent the morning with entrepreneurs here at the University of Texas, trying to solve different kind of problems and all of the different kind of business models that we were talking about. You know, I think we had a little tick up with the pandemic. We've had some distancing being done by our students. Of course, we're keeping an eye on the insane war that's in Europe and the effects on the supply chain and how that's affecting supply chain. And of course, looking at the economy. But for us here at the University of Texas, we're looking at placements. We're looking at interns that's been affected. We're looking at our great placement rate here at McCombs School of Business in the University of Texas, how that's being renegotiated with people staying home and those kind of things. So it's the same kind of issues that we talked about all this time on this program. How would this pandemic change our business model? How would it change the world? And how will we be affected? That's
great, Johnny. That's great. We also have today Llewelyn King, our own King. Where are you, Llewelyn?
I'm in Georgia. I'm also on vacation. I'm on the Georgia-Florida border staying with friends. Linda and I are down here, but we're also obviously at a huge personal cost of time. I have taken an hour out to spend with you and Dr. John Sibley Butler, and of course, our best new friend, Elizabeth Jennings. I love new friends. So you see how that stands, and I wouldn't be anywhere else anyway.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. Thank you for being with us today again. And our new guest of today, Elizabeth Jennings. How are you, Elizabeth?
Doing quite well. I'm very happy to enjoy this nice spring weather in the middle of our summertime spring that we've been having lately. So no complaints.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, for those that are watching and listening and don't know much about you, allow me to indulge. Elizabeth is, as I understand, the program manager at the Global Innovation Lab at UT Austin. She's also a principal at the Venture Atlas Labs, and she's a board member of the SWAN, which I believe stands for Southwest Angel Network. We'll know more about it. She's going to be with us for the hour, so lucky we are. Elizabeth has been working with entrepreneurs for most of her professional career and has held multiple roles, such as advisor at Transformative, Curva, the Texas Medical Center. She's been a mentor, a judge, and a speaker at Mass Challenge and TechCo, and she's been a founder of NE Initiative and the Savvy Simplicity Global Marketing. She has a BA in Anthropology and Latin American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yes, everything comes back to Austin eventually, doesn't it?
Absolutely. John, and here's another Longhorn. I mean, I'm trying to stay away from them, but I I can't work it out. I mean, how many Longhorns have you graduated, Johnny?
Well, it's Llewelyn King. You should have seen his face when you said Austin, Texas, and everything comes back to Austin, Texas.
I want you to know that before you moved to Austin, I was there lecturing to the legislature on the energy crisis in 1974.
Wow. Wow.
But you know, I got here in 74 and I had a good.
Well, I didn't see you. That's surprising. I didn't see you. I looked around. It was a small town then. It had actually it had both something approaching northern efficiency and southern charm, to change what Jack Kennedy said about Washington. But it was a much smaller and much easier to drive around than it is today.
It was. We changed it, and I was
Pretty
for the change.
permanent traffic jam, and you need to get Elon Musk, who you've got down there in Texas, to put the tunnel under the place so you can get around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we probably go back to horses.
Let me.
I don't think you know much about horses then, because when you have a concentration of horses, you also have a concentration of manure. And that would give your city quite the wrong impression for visitors.
I will comment on that later after Andreas introduce our guest.
Let me get into Elizabeth's frame of mind. So Elizabeth, you have been watching capital move around and change the world. I'm sure you have an opinion about Elon Musk acquiring Twitter. What's your take real quick first on the impact of COVID? We have said in this program many times that the journey of digitalization has been accelerated by COVID. Do you agree with that or not? And tell us also, what's your take on the economy for 2022 as it relates to starting a new company?
You know, we can certainly spend the entire hour unpacking those two questions. So that there's a lot to consider there. So as a little additional perspective for any of our listeners, I've spent about the last decade focusing on the intersection of how investors look at deals and how to realize them in the United States. So what I've spent a lot of time doing is unpacking how you structure a deal based on the reality of time and risk and money, as opposed to saying, I have a $50 million valuation, here's our tam-sam sum, I think I'll be successful, good luck. This takes a very pragmatic approach. So that's what I would like to frame this conversation with. If you're looking at market forces and really the balance of power, the balance of different leverage types when you're going into a new deal, it has a lot to do with the reality of the time frame in which you're looking at it. So that's why I preface this. If you're looking at, you're a SaaS company, and yes, absolutely, digitalization has taken over how you look at the risk threshold of it being able to adopt in the market. So if you're a SaaS company, your cost of adoption is probably going to be lower given the uptake of new digital technologies, given the willingness for companies to say, we're going to change our processes, we're going to change our protocols, because for the last 2 years, we've been forced to. You look at more resistant industries, for instance, like healthcare. That's my own personal background. Looking at new healthcare technologies and how they're integrated, we've seen a great upsurge of willingness to adopt new digital technologies, remote telemonitoring, telehealth, those sort of utilities, integrating them further into other systems because of COVID. So that looks, as an investor, you look back at that and say, our cost of actually running in the red to grow into these market segments may be different. You're also looking at how these different segments interface with another, particularly in something like healthcare, to lead on to our example, does this lead to the same cost rate, our same burn rate, our same, we're going to be in the red for these activities for 6 months, for a year, whatever that sales cycle is. What is the lead rate into the next segment? How does that bleed into other markets? A lot of times we see entrepreneurs who come here from international regions and enter the US market and think, well, we're going to go to Texas, California, Kentucky, Georgia, whatever, and think that the markets move that way instead of looking at it from a systems and an operational cost standpoint, which is, of course, one of the biggest factors you're looking at as an early stage investor is really where is your money going and what is the time frame on that. So all of that is a long way to say, I think that COVID has made certain barriers to market access, certain key factors that make these early stage investments in many technologies more risk adverse. I think it's alleviated a lot of that.
Mhm. What about your take on the economy in 2022? Do you see it as an up year, as a sort of slow year? Are we heading backwards perhaps because of inflation? What's your take on what's the sentiment on the investor side today for startups?
Well, I certainly can't speak for all investors ever, but I'll give you my personal opinion. You know, SWAN, which does stand for the Southwest Angel Network, we're focused on social impact enterprises. I help lead the health tech side, so I'm looking at long tail deals. I mean, really, you're thinking 7 to 10 years. More of the Series A, Series B side is what you would typically look on the tech side because of the nature of healthcare and with a social impact mission, which means that I look at a very tiny, very specific type of deals. So I'm looking at, well, what's my dollar going to be worth now versus what's my dollar going to be worth in 10 years, which is, if anyone knew that, we would be doing other things. We'd all be on a real beach, right? So, you know, why I mentioned that is we just launched a new fund. We actually just made official our very first VC fund to look at deals that are more of that long tail size. So from an investment standpoint, you know, there are many of us who see certain elements of peril in the economy, but yet we persist.
Yeah.
So locally in our little microcosm here in Austin, here in Texas, here in the US, I think we're reasonably insulated from some factors, you know, as far as it pertains to, will we still look at innovation? Will we still look at those high risk early stage investments? Can we still plan a decade in advance? I think that the mentality in which we've already approached those will remain intact. However, I mean, I am very concerned about elements of inflation. If, for instance, you know, on the board of directors of SWAN, we're always looking at how do we grow? How do we make angel investing accessible to normal people who have done well for themselves, who want to give back? It doesn't have to be painstaking. It just requires a mentality and, of course, a certain amount of resources. So when I speak to potential angel investors in this economy, it may make more sense for them to consider pulling out of other areas because of inflation in their portfolio and instead investing, you know, in these enterprises, particularly if they have a social impact. You know, they want to do good in addition to making a return. There may be more benefit to diversifying someone's portfolio out of what they may already have just due to inflation, because it's making it impractical, depending on their timeline, making it practical.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Elizabeth, you know, one of the interesting things as we look back on America 50 years ago, 98.9% or more of all of the great companies were founded in Boston, Silicon Valley, and Austin, Texas. And most of them were students. If you look at the relationship between age and wealth creation now, that is, our Michael Dale was, what, 19? Our John Mack, who started Whole Foods, was 20. Jim Tressard, who did National Instrument, was probably 20, 23. Jamie Rose, who did our first angel networks in Austin, was right there. My question is, with the university environment and all of the tools that the university has, will it make the outside world almost non-experimental? That is, if you look at inflation, if you look at everything else, what does the university bring? Why is it that all of the great companies were started by people in their 20s or before they reached 20? What is there about the university environment that allows something to happen versus when they move outside of the university? Because in my experience here in Texas, of course, we did it all, but it was the kids. It was John Mack, a philosophy major, who did Whole Foods. It was Michael Dale, who did Dell Computers. It was Kay Hammer, who did Evolutionary Technologies. What do you see the university bringing to that whole structure of startups?
That is a fantastic question. And I think that it's very relevant, today in the current ecosystem we have here in Central Texas. So here's my thought. I personally believe that in a university environment, if you have the right parameters in place, you also have that scientific rigor of risk. We have to test things, therefore, some things must fail, they must be failable. That is the entire mentality around lean methodology, around this is a startup, as this has something must be new, otherwise you're running a small business. And there's nothing wrong with that. But having that ability to fail, having that threshold to accept risk is experimentation. And I think universities can do that very well. You don't necessarily get punished. In private enterprise, if I, as a consultant running Venture Atlas Labs, developed a new service and it failed in the marketplace, well, I don't get paid, I get hungry, I go do something else. If I experiment, I have to be able to have that risk threshold to continue to persevere. The second thing that I think is very useful in a university setting is that cross-pollination. You have people, like 20 years old, 19 years old, like you said, they're being exposed to new ideas and they're absorbing information from everywhere. They can, look at new concepts, pull from different pieces, and, plug and play a lot easier and a lot more quickly. Whereas I think if you get to a certain success level, as you might later on in life, you do tend to fall back on things that worked 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that may not work as well now. Now you have other benefits that come with age as well, and wisdom and all of that. But I think that rapid ability to cross-pollinate is also very useful. And here's my last one. I believe that particularly young people in a university environment are constantly challenged to defend their work. What are you doing? Don't do this. This is a terrible idea. For instance, I recently supported a young entrepreneurship contest here at the University of Texas. And I had to tell some of the entrepreneurs just point blank, you have a terrible, terrible idea. Don't do this. This is bad. Why are you doing this? What late night endeavor led to all of you being stuck with this terrible, terrible idea? And I think that dynamic that students tend to have, or entrepreneurs, those that are part of ATI, for instance, means that they are constantly required to show their work. You may be 50 million after 5 years as a first-time founder, but you're going to need to work back and show your work on how you're going to do this. You have to take everyone out of the uncertainty mentality and show them these are the reasons why. Here is what this is predicated on. Not all of it may be true in the real world, but we've done our research, we've done our work. And I think universities force, that environment on people where they do need to do their diligence and they need to be prepared to defend their propositions. Those are my two.
Great answer.
Well said, well said. Llewelyn?
Well, this is very interesting. My concern is almost the other side of John's question. And that is, to what extent does all this university hothousing of new ideas, etc., deter those outside of the institutional environment? People who you referred to a few moments ago, Elizabeth, as small businesses, though that was not of great consequence, although you modified what you said right after you had said it. I think that for the national good, you actually need a huge outpouring of new small businesses, because the pleasures and the value of small business is almost limitless. It creates a nation of people who care, people who prosper, people who feel part of the system, people who do not feel their cogs in wheels, etc. When Napoleon said that the English were a nation of shopkeepers, in my view, he paid them a compliment, that there was a resilience and a strength in a nation of shopkeepers that is not reflected in France, which you might say was a nation of bureaucrats. I've been very interested in the College of American Business Arts in Charleston, South Carolina. It's very small and it's very different. It's a liberal arts college, rigorous liberal arts with a trade. but a very special trade. You can take blacksmithing, decorative plaster, stone cutting, etc. I think there's 6 of these: frame carpentry, fine carpentry, drawing. And the most extraordinary statistic about this operation is that about 1/3 of the graduates start a business within 5 years of graduating. And why is that? Because they have a saleable skill. If you are a stone cutter, you're not going to become Michael Dell. There is no place you can become Bezos cutting stone, but you can have a very rewarding, a small business, a very rewarding life, doing everything from working on cathedrals, possibly to what I imagine is the low end is working for a cemetery, but I don't know that. It gives an opportunity for people both to enjoy the hugely important intellectual strength that you get from liberal arts, to live your life fully and completely, and to work with your hands, which you might enjoy. I tell the story a lot about a young woman I interviewed there who I hear is doing very well, and I don't think she'd recognize this when I identify her just by type, but she'd been around too many jobs, probably too many boyfriends, a bit lost in the world. And she went to the College of American Building Arts and took blacksmithing. She found her fulfillment, her place in the world, working at a forge at 2,000 degrees, making beautiful, intricate ironwork, some of it going to French cathedrals. Another young woman was hoping to work on, is actually going to work on Liverpool Cathedral. And I happen to know her father, and he heard me talking about this. His daughter, who was a bit adrift, went to the college and became passionate about stone cutting and has done some absolutely extraordinary things. All of these people have a saleable skill that they can start as a business. If you have enough people doing that, you strengthen the nation enormously in a way that you do not strengthen it with, 100 new public companies. This is the other side of Johnny's question, and possibly, Elizabeth, the other side of what you do. I wonder if you have programs or instruction for those talented people who don't have pretensions to raise millions, but just want to start a business and basically do it metaphorically with a wheelbarrow.
Well, first of all, I really applaud your detail with stone cutting and how that you can study stone cutting and yet not hit rock bottom. I really appreciated that.
Oh, well said.
But I think you do raise a really good point. And I think sometimes academically, theoretically, we can conflate entrepreneurship and innovation. And so, in my remarks, I'm thinking of something that is more on the innovation side with scientific and technical boundaries. And in no way do I mean that to be condescending towards small business. Small business can innovate also. They can disrupt also. They can be very clever. They can completely change the economy, particularly locally, in very lasting, significant ways. I think that's one of the drawbacks to our universities, and particularly here in Austin, is we do not integrate well within that community. To my knowledge, there are small business development centers at many universities. I believe Texas State has one, but we do not have, to my knowledge, a similar office here at University of Texas.
If I might say so, franchising is a way of growing small business to be very big and important.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I was going to add a point and curious what Elizabeth thinks about that. The way I
in the United States,
the way I see this is that we're in this journey of digitalization of everything, right? And over little by little, the capabilities of digitalization due to the platforms, whatever you want to think of them, the cloud, mobility, social networks, blockchain, X, Y, and Z, all these platforms, as they grow pervasively, primarily in the beginning on enterprise companies that can afford it, and over time they get democratized as they keep spreading and spreading and spreading, right? Things like, like Twitter and how it's changed, it impacts wars or wherever it is available in terms of becoming a platform for the single voice to sound an alarm. I think that all these technologies eventually will find their way to the small business, right? And if you think about one of the hottest trends in because of COVID is delivery. It seems like the world has gone mad on innovation and capital around chasing new technologies around delivery of anything, in managing the curve. I see all kinds of investments in our summary of news that California is making all kinds of investments, and in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh is investing in smart loading zones. I mean, delivery all of a sudden has become this incredible benefit, convenience, right? Not everybody has time to go and spend 2 hours in a place. Not everybody wants to be seen. Not everybody has the time to do it and be beautifully dressed up to go do it. And, so delivery has all of a sudden become a dramatic new push because of COVID, right? So when you think about that, Elizabeth, and you think about the small business and the dynamics, one element that I wanted you to inject into the conversation is the international element. People that come to America for the right reasons, for chasing the American dream, liberty and justice for all, and all the reasons that most of us came, they bring a unique attitude, a unique sentiment to want to be part of this. What's your take on what the foreign gene on the entrepreneur angle brings to the party?
So there's about 7 different questions in that statement. So I'll take all of them at once, and then we'll have another conversation. So, with the entrepreneurs, and I work with an enormous range of entrepreneurs, and you have those that are just in ideation and are attempting to ideate from the American market standpoint, even if they themselves may be in another region because they intend to launch in America first. I work with entrepreneurs who are on their Series B, have 100+ employees, maybe more, and are millions of dollars in revenue, and then are adapting to the U.S. market. Both bring different mentalities to the U.S. And this part of this goes back to risk. When you look at a new environment, you have your original home perspective, you have whatever data you bring to the table, whether, I'm a Texan and I'm moving to Maine and I have to look at that environment, that's going to require adaptation, versus someone who comes from Australia or Venezuela or Italy. They're still taking in new information. The interesting part that both sets bring to the table, not just their risk threshold, is the insights they have and the amount of, I would say, diligence that I consistently see to make that happen. They tend to be very, very perseverant, willing to make, whatever concessions they have to realize new data, to go find and see what information they need to actually understand how to make things work. So they are very dedicated culturally. Everyone who decides to do this is their own personal culture, to be very dedicated to the exploration of how to make this work. Another area, and I apologize for this, I am getting messages on my screen constantly here.
All right.
Another aspect is that many of the organizations that they start, so if they're, looking at new technologies, delivery businesses, whatever their product may be when it comes to the US, many cases, particularly if they come from a smaller market than the US, they tend to be much more efficient operationally efficient. So, as an investor, we look at something that is called capital efficiency. How much can you actually accomplish for our dollar? And many of these organizations, if you come from a country such as New Zealand, you must be a very competent organization to win in New Zealand, because the market does not have enough bandwidth to absorb your excess, your inefficiency, your mistakes, there's not enough early stage risk capital in New Zealand for you to consistently fail. You must prove yourself, and then you must get to a large single market, which is one of the reasons why a lot of these countries do want to come to the US, is because we are a large single market to work with.
Yeah, let me comment on that since I have 2 books on it.
Please.
Since the 1870 census, the foreign born have been more likely to be self-employed than the native born. In Silicon Valley of this generation, not the Silicon Valley of Detroit, 40 to 45% of all of those companies are foreign born. Google is foreign born, right? If you look at that, right? Intel, foreign born. eBay is foreign born. Facebook, there was a foreign born founder there. LinkedIn is Germany, right? SanDisk is Taiwan. So it goes on and on. Of course, Google is Russian and Intel is Hungary. And as Llewelyn noted earlier, a lot of in England, they don't appreciate the shopkeeper. They don't appreciate the relationship between market economies and doing well. That is an American phenomenon. And so America has benefited, and the book was done by George Kosmeski on immigrant entrepreneurship. George Kosmeski was one of our founders here in Austin. And George said to me, the reason why I'm so wealthy, he had founded some companies, is because I'm a Russian immigrant. And I said in the 1830s, a scholar by the name of Jordan Zimmel laid out all the theory. So Andres, that's a great question. So we must almost always recognize that people come here, right? Not to complain, but to do well. It is Americans who complain, and it is the newcomers who tend to do well. I saw Llewelyn King said, for the first time, I agree with John Sibley Butler.
That's not actually true. I did agree with you one other time, but it wasn't on air.
Okay.
I would like to add, as an immigrant myself, who has not made millions, but has made a living. One of the things that we as immigrants have as an advantage is we don't have a fear of failure in the same way that Americans have a fear of failure. The other country that I've watched this in very carefully is Ireland. And Ireland, there was a terrible fear of failure for many decades, for many centuries, really. The fear of failure, what will I tell my friends, my community? I failed. I went out and put a sign up and started a business and failed. Whereas immigrants just don't have that because they aren't as sensitive to local disbelief in them. They don't care. They're trying to succeed. They want to succeed. If you look at almost any country that has a fairly high rollover of immigrants, the United States particularly, but say Britain, where there are a lot of people from the old Commonwealth move in, say in the newspaper industry, which I know best, all the big successes have come from outside, including a lot of the owners. Rupert Murdoch today, at another time, they came from Canada. Lord Beaverbrook was one. The success of immigrants is that, in a sense, not only do they not worry about failing, they also can pick and choose. They don't have inhibitions, cultural inhibitions, class inhibitions in a different society. They might in their home countries, but they don't when they come to the US, which suddenly is a glorious, broad place where you can do anything you want to do because they feel no constraints, social or even financial. The other great advantage, I think, about America is that you can fail in one city and succeed in another. Lateral movement is very possible. In France, there really isn't lateral movement. There is a city-state called Paris. and this is true, except for Germany, which has competing cities, of most European countries where the capital or the commercial capital dominates, and people are measured about whether they can succeed in that place or not.
Absolutely.
That is not true in the US. You can fail in Chicago and start again in Austin, where of course you'll immediately become enormously wealthy, according to one of its great academics, Dr. John Sibley Butler.
We consider failure, you know, I'm an angel investor myself. We consider failure a learning experience in America. So Elizabeth would give me $3 million in the next 5 years. I go to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I learned a lot, man. I have 10 now. You're right. You're right.
Bernard Shaw said,
and the other thing we're leaving out here
is the name that men give to their mistakes.
Yes, I mean, we're leaving out the great ecosystem that Silicon Valley has, and we have a good one here, and Boston has. And what that means is that, look, if I want to start a country western band, I go to Nashville. If I want to be a movie star, I go to LA. If I want to start a company, I go to certain regions. And the reason why, and it is very, very simple. You know, if I need a drummer, right, in Nashville, the drummer is busting tables somewhere, and there, come here. And the thing about Austin and Silicon Valley, we have accountants, we have lawyers who understand startups. That is, they would do stuff free, they would do stuff for equity. Okay, so Austin sits on the back of great IP lawyers, right, like Bill Hosey, who said, let me help the students out. And it sits on all of the angel investors who said, because we started this stuff with oil and gas, with the institution called the Capital Network, started by George Kosmeski. And Llewelyn, they were all people, and they would say the following: why should I invest in a company and wait 3 or 4 years when I can go dig a hole and see if I have hit the great petroleum?
Right.
So it's a lot of stuff learning. It's a lot of learning, not only by the entrepreneurs, but also by the investors themselves. And I tell you, we're also standing on oil and gas. Our first company is that Laura Kilcrease, who was director of the Austin Technology Incubator, who did billions of dollars in wealth right here in Austin. She's in Canada now. We talk a lot about how the Capital Network, and Llewelyn, we had to convince the oil people who had the wealth to invest in the kids. And the only thing we need was one great win. And they asked, how did you do that? Because it's a new model. And of course, the answer is we went from digging in the soil to digging in the brain.
Right.
So we went from petroleum, which we still have, to being very smart when it comes to patents and technology. So I've always said, Llewelyn.
That's a very, well, I salute you. Do you all hear that? I salute John Sibley Butler for recognizing how difficult it is to change from an extractive industry where wealth was given by nature to a creative industry where wealth was the product of science and talent.
Because we know that wealth starts with science and technology, not management, accounting, and finance. It starts with science. It starts with engineers. It starts with my Glowfish company that was very, very successful. Alan Blake, the CEO, sold for multi-millions, right? It was about the science, right? If you look at getting the science right, once you get the science right, then that's when the board of directors comes in, and it's all about the science. And we understood that in Austin starting about the 1970. Just when you left, Llewelyn, maybe you informed of that.
You missed the train, Llewelyn. You left too soon.
John, I want to ask you both whether there isn't an overestimation today that wealth will come only from science.
No, it comes from science, but not only.
If you go back to your oil drillers, wealth came from oil. That was the belief.
That's
wealth
right.
came from mining. You could mine coal, you could mine gold, you could basically mine oil, later mine natural gas. And those were the parameters that people had for the creation of large wealth. Along came science, the computer, the electromagnetic, if you will, revolution. Now the thinking is all wealth will come from the electromagnetic world. Maybe that is closing off other options. I will point out that one of the few new huge financial successes was Greek yogurt. Well, it wasn't new. It's just that somebody exploited it and became a billionaire, bringing Greek. Well, the Greeks had the same yogurt for 2,000 years. And somebody brought it to America and put a label on it.
And let me add,
and that is a better idea. That is not science. That is just taking what is in the box, not thinking outside the box, thinking inside the box, looking for what's in the box and exploiting it.
And where we are now, where we are in the world, it's not great scientists like Andreas. That's the problem, right? The science is fine. It's the human sciences that we must interact with and understand what happens in Europe when a war starts. So the technology is there. The question is, what do we do with this animal that we call people? What kind of science can we put around that monster? Because the technology has always, even you remember the Great Depression, it was not the science and the technology or the products, it was the people. And I think that's very, very interesting as something to study. All right, Andreas, I'm sorry, but Llewelyn has a way of moving the roost.
That's okay. Let me do some learnings here. So I heard loud and clear that one of the key things about being successful in the entrepreneur mindset is this notion of what I call the 3 Fs. And usually people in academia tend to stay away from the letter F because it's a bad thing. But I think that we have all concurred and agree that failing is an important part of the journey. If you look back at Edison and how many tries did he take at having a light bulb. So fail fast, but fail fast forward, right? And so learning how to fail fast forward is one of the key learnings here, and have a culture that allows that, right, is super critical. And I can see why, the foreign born not only adds value to that, but it also brings resilience and persistence and tenacity and not wanting to give up, not necessarily not afraid of failing, just not wanting to give up until somehow you figured it out, right? And so however many tries it takes. So fail fast forward, it's a big thing. The other thing that we talked a lot about is, again, this whole theme about really understanding the 3 mega trends that are driving everything that we're doing. Like it or not, digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization are driving all of things that we're doing. All of us are being driven by these 3 mega trends. And then the question is, how do you take advantage of these mega trends? And at times, and I think that there is a mega trend in the making with delivery, because it's one of the byproducts of the gig economy, the new economy, as we could call it, right? And the notion of digital currencies and all that, and sort of the independence from the few that control the world into a true democratized, independent, member-owned planet on every step of the way, which eventually, when all those things get, proliferated and properly, diversified across the planet, will impact all stratuses, right? Including, if you remember, gentlemen, and for Elizabeth, who hasn't heard it, I came up with the notion of how to solve poverty and homelessness a while back by basically saying that, the ultimate asset is data, my personal data, my body data, my interaction data, the data that I generate when I walk and I talk to you and when I buy something from you. And all that data has value to somebody. And at some point, we will live in a world where a human being living their life normally will generate roughly 10 terabytes of data annually, and it will get paid $125,000 a year for the data that they generate. And so the question is how this is all happening. How do we get there? And in the meantime, we have the wars and all these things. But let me circle back with Elizabeth and get a sense from her on the biggest challenge that capital has always had is deal flow. And would you say, Elizabeth, from the three sort of cat-bear seats that you have with your roles, do you see in any way, shape, or form an acceleration of deal flow? Do you see more people wanting to be entrepreneurs? Do you see that accelerating in any way because the utilization is happening at a faster pace? I get a sense that maybe yes, and you said a little bit of that in the sort of the health sciences, but do you see that really bursting up?
I do. I mean, personally, the issue that I see is never not enough deal flow. There's an infinite number line of deals in the, available.
Mhm.
Quality of deals may be another thing, and unique value within that set of deals is another thing again. So, for instance, with SWAN, we're looking at any company that is coming to the US. Doesn't have to be local. We work with other partner organizations. We have other syndicates that have different criteria for what they're looking at. And the fund, where we have specific theses. So the question for us in terms of deal flow, from what my experience is in that, is really never quantity. Sometimes it's quality, but then again, if you get enough quantity, statistically, you're going to get the quality as well. I see not just a greater quality and quantity of deals being produced here in Central Texas. I also see greater interconnectivity with other hubs that are also bringing more useful deals to this region. So something that was mentioned earlier is that some enterprises do better in some regions than others. You could fail in Chicago and be successful in Austin, and that's certainly true if you need access to certain manufacturing, if you need access to certain, you need access to ERCOT. For instance, you're not going to find ERCOT in Oregon. If there are certain environments that are more likely for your initial beachhead success, even, this could be a very good region. I see us having a greater connection. For instance, we have 2-3 months ago launched the European Network of Research Innovation Centers and Hub here in Austin, which is fantastic because that not only connects Austin throughout the European Union and Horizon 2020 countries and Friends of EU, we also are now connected to 18 different universities across the US. So I think there's just greater entrepreneurial interconnectivity that's helping deal flow as well. As someone with SWAN, we can also send a deal somewhere else if Austin's not the right environment or so.
Right.
And Elizabeth, I look forward to seeing some deals. I look forward to seeing some companies. That is, in the university, we have a tendency to create the academic side. But what we need to do is make sure that we launch actual companies out of those networks.
It is interesting. We look at a lot, something that Llewelyn mentioned earlier is the translation of a resource economy into a creative economy. And that's something that I think IC² has done historically a phenomenal job of evaluating, the economic potential and criteria to make that translation, or to develop innovation centers within, the gradients as it translates. We can take resources like oil, energy, and look at other resources like information, the information age. And then from information comes insight. And then from insight maybe comes art, and the art of how to move humans to make different decisions. And I think that, we can work on different deals along that timeline. So there's also just stages of development economically in Austin with deals. And when, Andres is speaking to the permutation of delivery companies, some of those are going to be, it's a resource. I need bananas and I need you to bring them to my office building now, or whatever that may be. But then there's an elevation of what we are delivering, what we are connecting, what we are moving, resource or value-based product thereof.
Absolutely. I wanted to inject real quick, looking at the time. Elizabeth, ¿hablas español? Saluda a nuestros oyentes en español rápidamente.
No, okay. You will not believe that you cut out exactly when you started speaking.
Just
Pero, podemos hablar en español.
Saluda a la audiencia en español rápidamente.
Okay. buen día, no sé qué puedo decir, pero gracias por escucharnos y si quieren hacer más con tu startup, con innovación, con inversiones, podemos hablar más después.
Excelente, gracias. Hey, John Butler, I would be remiss to tell you that she also speaks a little bit of French.
Oh, c'est bon, comment ça va? Pourquoi vous parlez le français?
Ok, italiano.
Ma grand-mère est français.
Con italiano, io con italiano.
Quand j'étais jeune, je le parle avec facilité. Je suis né en Nouvelle-Orléans. Ma grand-mère habite à Nova Scotia. Certainement. So, c'est bon.
So I wanted to let Llewelyn had a question. Llewelyn.
Yeah, I wondered, it may seem a bit off the wall, but I wondered how much your deliberations, Elizabeth, are being informed by ESG, which is the sort of flavor of the month in a lot of businesses.
That's a really good question. So, we see more ESG on the later stage deals, and we've looked at adapting that into our investment criteria with several of our, later stage private equity clients, where we're looking at more of the M&A side. These are basically self-sustaining corporations that will then be bought in to come into the US. And that's mainly with our European clients. And I was speaking to my work through Venture Atlas Labs on that front. I think that ESG criteria is a move in the correct direction for how we make decisions if we are looking at one of Andres' three main world-changing factors, the decarbonization and maybe even decentralization. I think it does allow for us to put value on those attributes that otherwise might be missed. If you're just looking at the bottom line, you're not necessarily bringing in that criteria. The alternative, a main alternative to ESG, is called IRIS Plus, IRIS like the flower. And that's from the Global Impact Investing Network, GIIN. And they have developed a set of criteria that can be used in due diligence by sector and by subsector, so that you can take in different social impact variations, different economic variations, manufacturing requirements, and sometimes those unique nuances that could otherwise get lost in just straight ESG reporting on decision making. But I think that it is a move in the right direction, but it isn't necessarily something that I see or that we see often at the early stage of companies.
Right.
Thank you. I'm interested in it. I have some misgivings, some fear that it may become a kind of new religion, that who sets the criteria and who therefore can pass judgment based on a criteria that they had no input into and that they may not agree with, that they may in fact believe to be negative. I think it needs to be watched and not become a slave. We should not become slave to it, although it does point out good behavior in companies or encourage them towards general good behavior.
Yeah. Let me pause real quick before I lose you all and share something real quick that I wanted to share with the audience. So our Digital 360 Summit 2022 edition is coming. The final location will be announced next week. It will be September 6th through the 9th. It's going to be fabulous. It will be the 4th edition. We will have a total of 18 keynotes and 9 panels, and it's going to be fabulous. These are the companies that sponsor, keynoted, and spoke in 2021. Many of them will be coming back. And I wanted to remind everybody of the work that we're doing at Texas State University at the CIEDAR Consortium that I co-lead. We're building these 9 living labs. 3 of the labs have been built, 6 labs to go, 700 acres, 150 megawatts of generation, all kinds of cool things, including flying drones and vehicles. And I want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring the Digital Roundtable. Elizabeth, in closing, when you think about it, the interesting view of working at the university, worrying about the international entrepreneurship thing, worrying with angels, small capital on the seed stage, What is your take on the middle? What is your take of where are we in Austin on venture capital, on $1 billion funds, $100 million funds? Do we have finally a competitive, sophisticated, round A, round B, round C funding? Are companies in Austin needing to go outside of Austin, or is there enough money in Austin for all that?
That's a really interesting question. The short form of my answer is that no, not really, not yet. But I think that we will get there. And part of that problem is that we haven't until these last few years had a great diversification of capital per segment, per stage. We're very strong in some areas and other areas are coming up. A lot of the new growth that we've seen in, reporting of numbers of VC funds and dollar values come from other funds outside of Austin that are bringing offices here that are looking more to the Austin market. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that we will get there. One of the indicators that I would look for are we growing our capital environment is, are we seeing more portfolio services provided by these funds? In other words, instead of just writing a check, are we, the translation from just money to smart money that you often hear is, are you helping them do business development? Are you helping them de-risk their early stage commercialization plan? Are you doing the, basic market research? Do you have personnel to help with staffing? Those sort of things are very well established in capital competitive environments like Silicon Valley. You will go there and you don't necessarily choose your fund just based on your term sheet. You choose the fund based on their reputation, their Rolodex, and their portfolio services. So when we get enough capital competition here in Austin where funds are really truly competing with each other, they're also competing on who can add the most elbow grease, who has the most insight, and who has the secret sauce that we all believe that we have to make those companies more successful or stronger, more resilient in a certain time frame. So I don't think honestly that we're quite there yet. I think these things take time and we do need to be patient, particularly for all of this to be stable. You can have a fund. Everyone can start a fund if they have enough money, but you cannot always start a second fund.
Right.
You have to be able to continue to regenerate this wealth, continue to regenerate the resources, the staffing, the talent. So there's just a certain process that I think we have to go through.
Yeah, well said, well said. Johnny?
I think you're exactly right. We know that when you have to raise a big money, you need to leave Austin and go to Boston or Silicon Valley. As I think we did most of our stuff early on Angel Networks. And I think the culture from Silicon Valley is different. If you look at emerging regions such as such as Denver and Arizona, then they're going to have their own kind of labor with them. But she's exactly right where we need to go.
Okay. Any other thoughts, parting thoughts, Llewelyn?
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Elizabeth, whether you've given thought. We've talked about the concentration of talent making Austin say an attractive center, Silicon Valley, Boston. But with the new diversification, with the remoteness, I work in Austin 1 hour a week, but I don't go there. I work for Andres 1 hour a week in Austin. Is that still going to be true, or are we going to have companies that are so hugely diversified that that particular criterion for situating a company disappears, that the talent can be widely scattered?
I think that it largely will be. I think there'll be certain sticky areas, if they require physical resources such as, demonstration grounds like what they're building at CIEDAR. I think that will be a physical resource that, requires certain personnel to be located in a certain area. But by and large, economically and in terms of what innovation happens, I have been outsourcing my team to different regions for at least the last 6 years. And most of the time it has worked phenomenally well. I can have data and resources back to me before I wake up in the morning. And that's not necessarily new, but it's a very common practice for organizations like mine and those that work with entrepreneurs. I think it'll become much more common and will allow for companies, especially early stage companies, to, choose on things like culture, common work ethic, versus, well, you have a good reference and you're conveniently located down the street. It may take more time for angel investors to become more comfortable with that, because we do like to see the people we're helping. And there's a certain, when you're working in that risky area, there's a certain comfort that comes from seeing someone.
Absolutely. I have one last question, Elizabeth. I wonder what your take is on the impact, the influence, the mindset of Oracle moving their headquarters to Austin and Tesla moving to Austin. Two significantly large companies with two incredibly significant billionaires.
Everyone wants to come to Austin now. That's what I would say. I would say that when we are bringing foreign delegations here, when we have trade missions here, it's with a new level of enthusiasm. They want to see those companies. They want to meet those companies. They want to tour those facilities. And Austin is on the international radar because of it. Not just for that, not only that reason, but it has certainly helped.
Yeah. So John Butler, let me tell you in front of the whole audience once again, you and Kosmeski, congratulations.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
And Laura Gilchrist. And Laura
Gilchrist.
But you are welcome. We did it.
Who knew that the three of you 35 years ago, or however long it was, and look at what's happened.
It was a great, great experiment, and it came from one man's brain, George Kosmeski, and it was a great experiment. And I tell people all the time, when we had no traffic, we had nowhere to go, and there was no jobs, and we had PhDs driving buses, and, and going out to the great wading pond that I won't talk about, skinny dipping. It was a great experiment, and it turned out.
There you go. Devil's Cove, and Lake Travis.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Elizabeth, it's been wonderful to have you. We could stay here for hours. We appreciate you being with us today. And thank you for the insights, and congratulations on everything that you have done and you're doing. And we look forward to staying in touch.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. This was such a fun conversation. I think we could have done it for 3 or 4 hours, stop for snacks, maybe a glass of wine halfway through. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Could we move the wine up a bit earlier?
We can start with the wine and take the conversation from there.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, I want to tell you that you are very, very, very articulate and have wonderfully interesting things to say. And I'm so glad you've been on the program today. Absolutely super guest.
I very much appreciate that. That means a lot.
Any final thoughts, Johnny?
I think that's good. I think she's at a wonderful university in a wonderful region and would do great things.
You got your guitar nearby?
I do. For me, Elizabeth.
Let's take us away.
Si vous avez longtemps, je viens de suivre mes papiers militaires pour aller à la guerre avant mercredi soir. Mais si qu'on le grand, je ne veux pas la faire. Je ne suis pas sur la terre pour tuer les faux gens. Depuis que je suis né, j'ai vu mourir des frères, j'ai vu partir les mères et nous attirer.
Bravo!
Well done.